And thank you for coming, and let's call for the roll.
Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Johnson?
Here.
Mr. LaSalle?
Happily here.
Mr. Mahoney?
Present.
Mr. Meyer?
Here.
Ms. Schausman? Here.
Okay, let's approve the minutes. Most of you, or all of you, I hope, have had a chance to read the minutes for March 19th. And do we have a motion to approve?
I so move approve the minutes.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous. Okay. Well, we have a lot on our plate tonight, so we want to jump right in. I'll give a little bit of a chair report before we look at our agenda. But I just want to first say it's a delight to have our to have Betty Schaafsma back after.
It's nice to be back.
Yeah, very good. And also, John will be a little bit late tonight, so
Hopefully just a little bit late.
a little bit late. So Martin will be standing in his stead for the time being. And then I just wanted to say that tomorrow night, if you're available, we have during the commission meeting at 7 o'clock, I'll be giving the report, the Transportation Advisory Committee report on behalf of our committee. So if you can show up to cheer me on or throw tomatoes, whichever, heckle from the crowd, that would be great. So
How much are tomatoes a pound now?
I don't know. It depends on if they come from South America or
Organic? Would you prefer
organic. Oh, what a rough crowd. Okay, so all right. Well, let's move on. Take a look at our agenda. And are there any thoughts or comments or changes that need to be made? Martin, you had said that you wanted to...
Yeah, I was going to give the members any opportunity if they wanted to move anything. But if we could, we'd like to request just to defer 2 items to the back end of the agenda. John Lewis is attending another meeting right now at the request of the city manager. So unfortunately, you're stuck with me. I'll give you all the briefs except for items 6E, which is the trolley program discussion. John has a couple questions that he wants to ask the committee and kind of get some further clarification on that. And then item 6G, which relates back to an email that we got from you guys, and we just need a little bit more information in order to try and make that an action item. So we're going to ask you to defer that to the back end. If John makes it here by then, I'll be happy to speak to those. If he doesn't, then we'll probably ask you guys if we can defer it to our next meeting.
Very good. Any other changes that need to be made? Okay, let's move on. We always allow for public comment, and so if there are folks that would like to make public comment, you're welcome to come at this time.
Let me just remind you that if it has to do with Tharp Court, that is the first item on the agenda.
Okay.
So it might be better if they waited until then.
Okay. And have the cards been turned in to you?
No.
Comment cards? Yeah.
Okay.
No, we're just waiting for results. Yeah,
Okay.
we did say that we would report back at this meeting.
Sure.
So.
Okay. So let's move on to item 6, new business discussion items. And 6A has to do with the transportation mitigation measures on Glen Oak Road at Thorpe. Court Coast Redwood Avenue. All right. Martin, is that you?
Yep.
Okay.
At the last TAC meeting, we had several residents from the Tharp Court, Glen Oak intersection, that community around there, come and asked the committee for a few things that they wanted to get some assistance from the city with. First thing being some traffic calming, some speed analysis, and then possibly a dedication of a striped crosswalk at that intersection. I've gone out with a couple members of our staff, and we've done some preliminary measurements. the issue there are several different issues that all come into play. One of them being just the regional development that's been going on in the Glen Oak area for the last few years. You've had a few new developments come along there. You've got the high school, some other ancillary issues. And each of those developments have some entitlements that are given to them when they go through the development process. So based on all of the various issues there, we didn't think that our analysis was going to be sufficient to give everybody a proper level of assurance that we're doing the right thing. So we made a decision to bring on one of our list of consultants that we have on. It's a professional consulting firm that does traffic analysis, intersection analysis, and we've issued them a work order to essentially do, first thing is traffic count, really figure out what's the real traffic counts that we're getting there, through that area at peak times. Pedestrian analysis, what's the level of pedestrian service that's coming through there for peak times. To take a look at the entitlement rights for the recent developments that have gone in there. One of the issues is the sightline issue, and that goes back to the on-street parking. So you kind of have to take a look at both those issues. What are the entitlement rights, and what is causing these issues with the sightline issue. So we recently issued a work order to Replinger and Associates to basically take a look at all these issues, and then within 25 days, I think is what we scheduled for that, they are supposed to bring us back a formal recommendation for the TAC to take a look at. And we'll take a look at that. It's a recommendation, and we'll take a look at what's implementable. When you give a consultant too much latitude, they can recommend the world. But we'll take a look at what's implementable. And then at the next TAC meeting, we should have an idea in terms of what we can do to try and assist those residents there. Now, one thing we are doing in the short term, we've got two options. I'm either going to deploy the police department's trailer-mounted radar system. That really is just a public notice. It's not an enforcement item. It doesn't photo any plates and all that, issue tickets. But it really kind of makes the drivers coming through that area aware you're probably going a little bit faster than the speed limit allows in this area. So that's the first thing. And that, I was trying to get that done for you this week. Scheduling is a little bit tough. If I can't get the police department's trailer-mounted one, we have a couple ones that are post-mounted, which require us to do some locates. But we'll probably get something out with that Glen Oak Tharp Court intersection by first part of next week.
Excellent.
Okay. I hope that addresses at least some of the issues you guys have brought up to us. It was a lot, and we tried to capture as much of it as we could, and still work it out in something that we can afford within our budget and what the consultants charge. So we'll have an answer for you guys next month. And then one of the questions that you guys had was the no outlet sign there at the intersection. Based on just the coming up Glen and then turning into Tharp Court and the distance from the turn intersection all the way back, that's one thing we'll ask the consultant. My personal recommendation is the no outlet sign really isn't going to make a difference there. Once you turn in, it's pretty self-explanatory that you don't have an outlet going through there.
Explain that to all the people that come down.
Okay. Well, I've got a very high-paid consultant that will give us an evaluation on that. So if he says, no outlet sign, that's a fairly inexpensive cost to us. But then we have to be careful with how many signs we start putting out. If you put out too much sign, citizens start complaining about, visual obstructions, visual pollution, all these other issues. So we'll rely on our consultant to give us a good recommendation and then see what we can do to implement that for you guys. Okay.
Could make it a gated community.
Actually, I did have to put a fence up because everybody was coming through from the high school.
Mhm.
They come through our backyards, they went through our front yards, they were at 9 o'clock at night. I was out there taking the garbage out and I had a high school kid peek around the corner of my house.
Mm.
He scared the dickens out of me, so fences went up all the way.
So,
I'm sorry, just a moment.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we just got a comment. If you do want to make a comment on the discussion, we'll need you to come up to the podium and speak on the mic. Okay?
The microphones don't pick up from back
Yeah.
there. So,
We can hear you, but
Yeah.
you're being recorded.
so if you want to be on television, come.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
And I'm glad you came. We were going to try and touch base with someone in the neighborhood in the event someone didn't show up this evening. So I'll rely on you three ladies. I'm assuming all three of you live in that neighborhood. Make your neighbors aware. We're investigating it. Someone's probably seen me out there with a wheel measuring some stuff out. You'll definitely be seeing the consultant out there. You'll basically be out there for a day doing traffic analysis and all that. By next month, we'll have an answer for you. Yeah, but you'll have to. If you have a formal question, you need to come up there. State your name and address when you get up to the podium, please. Let me make sure that the mic's
They're
on.
not turned on.
Sorry. When you want.
Yeah, this one is. Go ahead and
Okay.
have a seat right there.
Thank you. Okay, I'm Sharon Lanz, L-A-N-Z is the last name, and I'm at 20038 Tharp Court. One thing with the consultant coming out, I think that's really great. I know sometimes they come out for an hour or two. I don't know whether he's really going to spend the whole day out there looking, but all those streets from the high school that come out onto Glen Oak, when that's around 3 o'clock, when those high school kids get out, and then they're coming across with, like those pictures that we gave you last time, they come clear out, and they're hurrying. You know how kids are; they've got to go really fast. So I think that the
The scope has them coming out. Are you talking about pedestrian traffic or vehicle
Well,
traffic?
wheel traffic.
Okay.
Cars.
Yeah, the scope is to analyze during peak traffic with the consideration of the school. So
Okay,
he'll
that's
be
what I
there
wanted.
in the mornings. Okay.
Okay.
Might take a break for a couple hours during lunch, especially for the pedestrian traffic. You know, it's not going to catch a lot during that time
Right,
period.
right.
And then he should be back in there when the school lets out.
Well, and then when, like on a sunny day, I know we don't have a whole bunch of those right now, but that's when you get more people walking. So if they're going to go out on a pouring down raining day, there's not going to be a whole lot of walking activity. But yeah, the kids that come out of there are really making it even more dangerous. Going back to your dead end, no outlet sign, whatever, I prefer no outlet. We really do need one of those. I mean, people look and they see, you know, normally if they would see the word court, you know, they would figure that it didn't go through. But we have people turning around there every day, and we've got a lot of children on our street, and those kids are going to be playing down on the end where these cars are going to be turning around because it's flat. Otherwise, you have the slope. So my opinion is we really need that no outlet sign.
Yeah. On the traffic study, the first part of that, I think, if I heard you right, Martin, is going to be where they lay down the counters, and so they'll determine what part of
Yep.
the day is
That'll
the
run for
busiest.
a 24-hour period. You know, so you'll get true traffic counts, and we can give you peak and non-peak hours, so we'll know what's coming through there. We have numbers now, but they're not current, and with everything that's changed in that area, and that's one thing I want to emphasize. We typically don't go to this level of service when we receive requests for pedestrian walkways or striped pedestrian walkways. The reason we took the measure on this one is just because that entire area has really had a big change in the last few years. So all of the data we had wasn't the most current information that we needed. So we're doing a little bit more for your community than we typically do. And I'm emphasizing this for you gentlemen and ladies because we can't afford to go through this effort for every request that we get for a pedestrian walkway or issues like this. It's extenuating circumstances such as this that warranted something a little bit higher than I'm able to do and that John's time dictates for us to get out there. So we made the administrative decision, let's bring on a hired gun and let them give us the most pertinent information.
Yeah, 'cause they're still building
Yep.
over there, and
Right.
so that's even going to be more people because
Yeah.
it looks like now they've got.
And that's the other thing. I'm not a
besides the
planner.
condos.
Once you started getting into
No, I
entitlement
don't.
rights, I'm like,
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Yeah. Thank
May
you.
I- may I-
And yes.
ask a question of this young lady?
Yes.
Have you gone to the Oregon City High School or school board regarding this? Because I know if I was on the school board, I would want to know what you just communicated to this board. The conduct of the students from the high school
Right.
is partly what's causing the problem.
Yeah, no,
And as a principal of that high school, I would want to know how my students are reacting, interacting with the neighborhood. Yeah, I mean, it's important.
Yeah, I did actually, and I have seen one I didn't see the actual accident. I saw the aftermath of it already between two high school kids.
I would suggest,
So-
for your information, I would go to the school board and communicate to them what you've told us, because there might be a means by which a principal could, for lack of a better phrase, lower the hammer on some of these.
Well, particularly if their property rights are not being respected, people creeping around houses and things like that. I'm not, I think that would be worth putting something on the record. I agree with you, Robert.
And just the traffic itself, because I know kids driving, that's a dangerous place to be when school's out.
Yes, it is.
A parking lot.
What they're trying to do is skirt the 20-mile-an-hour zone on Beaver
Yeah,
Creek.
they come right out on, because the traffic lines up going onto 213 on Glen Oak when those kids are out. So now they've decided, oh boy, there's, a couple more roads we can take. And then they come out and then they try to go this way, but then they change their mind and decide to go that way. And it's but the school can't even get the kids to pick up the garbage. The garbage has gotten so bad over there at the school, and it's blowing into the people's yards of the new buildings that are there. But,
just not being
I live way
managed.
down, so.
That's
Yeah,
That's
it's
Union
really
High
gotten
School.
bad, yeah, so.
Bob, did you have a comment?
Yes, I went over there the other day and scoped everything out, and Tharp Court has a very limited turnaround at the end. It's
Exactly.
not like a normal cul-de-sac.
Well, it's not a cul-de-sac
Right.
at all.
Yeah,
No.
and I have a little car, and I had to back up, so
Exactly.
especially if there's children around, it'd be very dangerous. I made my own survey, and I didn't get paid for it. I don't know how much. Can
we
you tell us
appreciate
how
that.
much? Can you tell us how much a traffic engineering study costs?
I move that we double Bob's salary.
The total cost is in the neighborhood of $2,000.
Okay.
Wow.
And, excuse me,
I'll
but
be
you,
interested to find out what their study comes up with, because I can tell you right now that there should be no parking on Glen Oak Road for a period of from a half a block to a block on either side of Glen Oak and also on either side of Coast Redwood. It doesn't take a traffic engineer to figure that one out at all. And I hope when they come up with their study results that that's part of it, because that is very, very dangerous to get out of.
The question is, what were the entitlement rights that were transferred over to these properties that were required to put up that on-street parking? And would imposing any parking restrictions on them violate those entitlement rights?
Can those be
Well-
revoked, those entitlement rights? Once
That-
applied,
that's-
are they irrevocable?
That's a question I couldn't answer for you.
Okay.
May I
That's
interject
something
on
that I
that
think
comment?
they may have missed when they were first planning for that. Then, if they gave them those rights, it would be
And
interesting.
that's why we deferred the question to a
Right.
professional consultant
Yeah,
to
there's
review those
nothing
issues.
being
and
brought down on you at all. It's just,
I don't take anything personally.
I just
don't
think
worry.
future reference needs to be made on that kind of a situation.
And for the record, state your name and address.
My name is Erica Stardig. I live at 20037 Tharp Court. When we purchased our homes, there was a different owner of the homes that are being put up now. It has since been bought by an additional, another contractor, and I believe the plans had changed. Originally, there was different housing going up than there is going up now when we purchased our homes.
Can I
So don't
stop
know.
you just for a minute? I'm pretty sure I know what.
If he comes in, there's a problem.
Your microphone is not turned off.
Oh, sorry. Do I need to restate all of that?
did you hear some
It
of
can't
it?
hurt you.
So when we first purchased our homes, there was a different contractor that was building the townhomes. There was only one set of them, I believe 6 of them total when we purchased. Apparently they went bankrupt during the last few years and someone else bought the property. And so there are different contractor that is now building. So I'm not sure if that affects the rights that you were speaking of
Typically, yeah.
previously, but the plans definitely for the housing was changed. So I don't know if we stand any grounds to advocate for the no parking on Glen Oak.
Will the consultant be looking into some of those issues, Martin?
That's specifically what he was brought on to take a look
Okay.
at.
Good.
And
All right.
typically, like the neighborhood that's across the streets was referred to as a neo-traditional neighborhood. It's tighter density. You've got parking in the rear, smaller houses with one car garage. It's the traditional character of a neo-traditional. It's basically trying to replicate like a brownstone feel in Philadelphia. Well, to compensate for that lack of residential parking, they typically require within the development, the planning of the development. So changing contractors halfway won't change the entitlement rights. It's something that they said when you build it, it's going to require these things. So they probably require the on-street parking at that point.
Don't they typically require one parking spot per household in those type of complexes? Because I'm not aware that there's enough parking on that property for,
And
especially
that's-
with the apartments now, because they were originally doing townhomes and the apartments were not part of the original.
And the on-street parking is probably to compensate for a deficiency within parking in the total development. And that's, again, this is why we said this is not just a clear-cut crosswalk issue. There are other issues in here. We
I'm
need someone
very
that
aware.
can bring some time in dedicated solely to this issue and give us a good analysis.
But by our next meeting next month, we should.
Yeah, he's got a
be able-
25-day work window.
Okay.
Notice to proceed was issued yesterday.
And would our third guest have anything to say?
This is Annika.
I was going to
She's my grave concern for
Not
wanting the
everybody-
crosswalk.
Yes.
Not everybody has been introduced. Very well.
She's 7 months this week, so very
Be what?
busy. She'll be 7 months this week.
7 months.
Beautiful.
Okay. Good. I was a lot louder than that when I was 7 months.
Well, she can be. She's pretty good.
But we do really appreciate you coming down and making your voice known, and we'll do everything we can. So
Thank you for your time
Thank you.
and the commitment. We really do appreciate it. So.
No problem.
any other comments from the?
Does anybody
Committee?
want to provide an email address?
Yeah, we can give you updates along the way. Well, I tell you what, I'll give you my business card and send me an email. And,
John, anything on this? Okay, let's move to the next agenda item, 6B, Clackamas River Drive speed reduction request. This is an information item. And Martin or John, I guess you have to arm wrestle to figure out which one he's going to do the report.
Oh, I didn't do that. I forgot.
okay. I don't believe it was the last CAC or the TAC meeting. It was the one previous to the last, so 2 meetings ago. We got a request to evaluate speed zones out on Clackamas River Drive. Excuse me. And specifically to provide a new farm tractor sign that had been swiped, for lack of a better term. Farm tractor sign is on order. They're a little harder to get than we thought. So that's on order. We have spoken with the state in terms of doing a speed analysis on that section. Just really touching base with them, saying we're getting ready to do a traffic count internally. Once we have that data done, we'll ask the state to put this on their work plan. Typically takes 60 days to, once they've received all the paperwork, fully completed, to get that scheduled out to get a speed analysis done for them. Okay.
And that'll go from the tight curve there all the way back to the roundabout?
Actually, I think we're going beyond the roundabout. I think we're going to take it a little further up than that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know there was something later on the agenda that talks about that all the way up to Abernathy.
Yep.
Okay.
You gonna put some good theft screws in the
I'm sorry?
signs so they can't back it up?
I don't know if that works anymore. These kids are a little more ingenious than they were when I was a kid. We just knock it over and...
Weld the nuts on the back of the sign.
By the way, I just want to comment, as long as our guests are here, that we do have, if you or someone you know would like to apply to become a member of this committee, we have, I believe, two spots open. So just invite you to think about that. So, okay. Thanks for that report, Martin. And then on to item 6. So is there any questions on the tractor sign? Okay. 6C, Washington Street speed study, decision required.
John, you want me to do this one?
Well, I think we found some inconsistencies out there with some of the signage. I suspect some of it's got to do with the old 82nd Drive designation, and then the new work that happened with the Jug Handle project. So we're inquiring with ODOT to see if they have the specific speed limit designation for that entire run. And if they don't, or if they feel like it's confused, then it might make sense to add that into the speed study for Clackamas River Drive, because it really feels very much like the same street at this point with the roundabout in the middle of that. So we're working on trying to get ODOT confirmation on what the posted speed should be. It's 25 at the Washington Street Bridge there near Abernathy and 17th, and it goes up to 35 in the middle, and then once you get back towards the new part of the project, it drops down to 25. So, and then go through the roundabout, and it stays 25 for a while, and then goes up to 40. So, yeah, there's some inconsistencies there that we just want to make sure, rather than just pull signs down and put up the speed limit that we think makes the most sense, make sure we get the old ODOT speed designation and get a record of that from them.
It looks like a southern movie speed trap when you go through there, you know, up and down.
I'd say that if we did much speed enforcement in town, but that right, so. Doesn't look too much like that. I don't see too many people pulled over along there.
So, Mr. Chairman, looks like they're looking for a motion from us on this to set the parameters of the study.
Excuse me.
It says decision.
Yes.
That's because I thought it was something different.
Yeah, got creative. No, I concur.
I thought that we needed to find out if you wanted to do it, but John said.
Well, I think some of the testimony was questioning whether or not we should do something more.
Steve
there.
brought it up.
I brought it up.
Yeah.
Because the guy was having trouble at the other end.
Well, I would imagine that doing tacking on a study as opposed to doing an entirely new study would be cost effective. As long as we're already doing one.
Well, we don't pay the state to do those, so costs.
Not an issue.
At least at this point, it's not an issue. It's more a scheduling piece. If they don't have record of what the posting should be, or if that record is confused by maybe a couple different sections, and we're asking them to look at more of kind of a corridor from really Abernathy Bridge to, or not Abernathy Bridge, Washington Street Bridge near Abernathy, all the way through the corridor, then that'd be the right time to post that.
Well, without cost consideration, it makes even more sense.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. It's more time. You remember how long the last speed study took.
Right.
So there's one person in the state that does those evidently, and so we get on the list. Hopefully we'll get an answer as to what the old records show much sooner than that. So I know Kevin's working on that. But, yeah.
Are you looking for a motion then? So-
No, I don't think.
Okay.
I've got one question.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bob.
So is the issue that it goes from a 35 down to a 25? And the thought is that it should be maybe 35 all the way through there? Or I don't quite understand what the discrepancies.
I think it is a question of whether or not the speed limit should be raised, and if so, where to 35. It feels very much like 35 is the appropriate speed limit through there. Although
Although once you get to the roundabout, it might be a little.
Well, roundabouts can be signed at a lower
speed. I see.
speed for.
Yeah.
They're actually not. They're advisory speeds, right? Through corners and things like that. It'd be posted as an advisory speed.
Okay, I just wanted to get it straight in my mind exactly what the issue was there. So, okay.
I think one time it was 25 all the way through there. And the state said, put it back up to 35, because that was a state highway at one time. So
It just is from a driver's perspective. It's so wide through there, and
35 is all right with me, but
Okay, so no decision is required. Is there any other discussion before we move on? Okay. Let's see, item 6D. Improved pedestrian crossing at 7th and John Adams. This is an information item.
So I'm going to do this, or are you?
I'll do it.
Okay.
The last TAC meeting, we advised you guys we were at beginning the work effort of installing some pedestrian flashing symbols, some ped crossing symbols at 7th and John Adams. We went through the work effort of getting everything ordered, almost issued the work order, and then John had a very astute observation that we probably should run this by the Historical Review Board before we put these ped crossings out there. So we're in the process of doing that now, getting an opinion from them, making sure that this isn't going to cause any issues for the HRB. The items are still being purchased. We've got them in the budget for this year, so regardless of whether they're deployed at this location or an alternate location, we still are making the investment in that technology for the city. As soon as we get some sort of indication from the HRB that this is either yay or nay, we'll respond accordingly.
You have my full support on that one. I saw the little nuance that took place on the questioning of that, and it was a curveball out of left field. And we had discussed that before that comment was made. And everybody here, I think, supported that. It's pedestrian safety. And I'm speaking for myself. I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea.
Well, we did get a motion from this body to install it, and so I think if it, I think it was this was a request. It wasn't really my observation. It was a request from the City Commission that we take it to the Historic Review Board because it's amber lighting. It's going to be different. It's in the historic McLaughlin Neighborhood District. So, but in talking to Christina, who staffs that, she felt like there's a question about whether or not this is a major public improvement project or not. So, the way the Historic Review Code is written, if it's a major public improvement project, we're supposed to take it before them. Whether this is major enough for that or not, it's not clear in the definition. So we're just going to go ahead and take it before them. She thought it would be more of a courtesy,
Yep.
and so we'll do that.
Okay.
I think it would be especially attractive during the Christmas holidays. Extra lighting and.
There you go.
We could change the amber lights to red green.
There you go.
Unfortunately, Bob, the heaviest foot traffic is during Halloween. So we're going with orange lights instead of red and blue.
We could put corn stalks on it to kind of hide it. Okay.
Did you see the brochure in your packet?
Yep, I tell you what.
That's what they're
Hang a
ordering.
wagon wheel.
There you go.
Yeah, if you haven't seen these yet, Kathy provided you guys a brochure of what the crossings look like.
It's not the solar one, but it is, right.
Now, is this
It is
the
the
one
solo
where
one.
it's going to be by Singer Cafe and the?
We're not doing a solo though, right?
Firehouse?
We're not.
Yeah.
Is that where it is?
But he said it's
I think it's
actually
the
on
corner.
the east end of that intersection, though.
Okay, because what I was wondering, is it going to impede the traffic from the signal, which is a block down
Washington.
from
up
Washington
to
when
the-
they turn?
If there's a pedestrian there, it would. But if there's a pedestrian there,
You have to stop anyway.
you'd have to stop anyway.
Right.
So we don't think it's further
Okay.
contributing to that. But
Okay.
you're right. It's only a block away.
Right.
But they'll use the other intersections, instead being the one they should be at.
It's on the corner that crosses over to the Carnegie
Right.
Library.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay.
How much are these things being used in other communities, other cities? Quite a bit? Or are they still in the test mode?
I don't have a specific number, but I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one
I see 'em
on
a lot.
Foster. Yeah.
And
just-
they're functional and they're really good items.
Oh, I think
I
they
mean,
are.
They're effective.
They're very effective.
Okay, good.
Very effective.
They have them on most of the where you cross the I-205 bike ped path on Division and Powell.
Yeah.
They have them there, so they're effective.
Yeah, I remember seeing those over there.
They're effective.
I think yeah, I know they're big in Portland. I'm not sure if ODOT has.
I haven't seen them on
I haven't
any
seen them too
state
much on
highways.
State highways.
Yeah. The good thing is they're passive. Unless there's a pedestrian there, they don't.
They don't work.
They're not causing any sort of nuisance. When a pedestrian comes there, that's when they're activated. So.
Good enough. All right, if there's no other discussion, then let's move on to 6E, which is the trolley program.
So this one warrants some discussion again. A couple things. Budget committee passed the budget for the city last night. So in that was a one-year budget for the trolley for this year and no budget for the trolley next year. So the trolleys, and this, the city commissions discussed this trolley issue enough to where I think they feel pretty strongly about the fact that those trolleys aren't going to be in their current form beyond that period of time. There is some discussion about downtown parking, and on May 1st, Bill Clur, who is managing the downtown parking program, is providing the city commission with a work session, or no, May 1st is not a work session, a commission report and update on downtown parking.
Excuse me, is that 7 o'clock here?
Yes,
May 1st?
May 1st. Sorry.
What time again?
7 o'clock. Regular city commission meeting. I don't know when he's on the agenda, what particular item. So it's obviously, city commissions follow an agenda, and he could be later on the agenda, but the meeting starts at 7. There is this issue with, again, which department is managing which programs, and I know this came before the Transportation Advisory Committee, and something that the Transportation Advisory Committee would like to continue discussing. Again, I'm not sure if we're talking about a trolley or if we're talking about a shuttle, because I think we were able to differentiate between a shuttle and transit improvements. I guess the other update there is I'm working diligently with TriMet to try and schedule a meeting time where we can meet with them and their operations group to talk about enhancements to TriMet service in Oregon City, and I think that's the best place to start, and I can provide updates to you about TriMet service. But this question about shuttle service and whether or not parking is a problem downtown, as when I've shared this committee's discussion with the city manager and the police department, there's been some frustration on their end about whether or not shuttle service is warranted, and if how we can make those kind of decisions without more study effort, and how we would fund that. It's kind of I would say. It's a sensitive area that I'm not really sure how to proceed. So what we got from you last time was the request that we bring to you a discussion about trolleys and shuttle service. I'm asking for more clarity, I guess, so that I can take that and share it with. I don't think that conversation and the content from those come from the Public Works Department, even though we oversee the Transportation Advisory Committee and we staff that. I think it needs to come. If that's the conversation that we want to have, I guess what I'm hoping to get out of this discussion is some more specifics, what questions we want answered. Is it specifically about parking, about trolleys, about shuttle? So that's what I was hoping to kind of.
Well, from my recollection of our last discussion on this, we had determined that, like as you're saying, there are different ways that it can be used. One is a bus, intercity transportation. One is a shuttle for parking purposes, and the other is the trolley for tourism. And we had talked about that for the purposes of intercity transportation, a bus, that it's probably not appropriate for that. The equipment's too expensive to maintain. It's not, efficient on fuel and other things. And we'd also, if I recall correctly, that we'd also determined that if it's going to have become a shuttle service for parking, that there are probably vehicles that are, again, more appropriate for that purpose. So at least in my thinking, we had come to the conclusion that really the only viable use of the trolleys would be as a trolley for tourism. And, that may not be warranted at this time. I think certainly, in 5 to 10 years, I think the tourism here in Oregon City is going to be phenomenal. And I think something like that would be very, very effective. But that's my recollection, so...
Well,
I think
I've kind of changed my view of it because I'm kind of the instigator of the whole thing, I guess, to begin with. But having to learn more about the trolley and its pros and cons and limitations, I can see that it would not be appropriate to be used as a shuttle. But it has a very high tourism value, which I can see maybe increasing even this year with the opening of the end of the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center. I would hope that would bring more visitors, and then like Blaine referred to on down the line, as this Blue Heron property develops, again, more tourism, but that's down the line. But what I would like to see is at least try to mitigate a little bit of the costs this season by starting a $2 daily fee, maybe, and purchase some of those little hand counters like they use for golfing to count the number of people using this trolley.
They do count.
You have those? Okay.
No, I know that they do keep track.
But I understood
Yeah.
that they can't keep a very accurate track because they can't keep track of who gets on and off and then reboards after.
Well, that's
so I'm
true.
thinking if these little stamps like they use in the Expo Center when you go to see a big program at the Expo, so that if somebody has a stamp, when they get back on the trolley, they wouldn't be recounted again. That's what I was just thinking about this year's use of the trolley. You might be able to mitigate a little expense. Going further, a shuttle system is a whole different ballpark, as we all have kind of agreed upon. And I think that it might be worthwhile considering putting a questionnaire out to the city by computer, asking people their interest in a shuttle system, how often they might use it, where they're located, similar to what the questionnaires for the South End concept plan has used. And I don't know how viable that is. It's just an idea I thought of. Mm-hmm. Get input from the public on the potential use of a shuttle system.
From my point of view, I think we've sort of handed John a conundrum that maybe we should rethink. And there's several things here in the next year, couple of years, that are going to really change the character of this community, and it's going to include not only traffic but parking. And one's the master plan development of the Blue Heron site, and the other, and I agree with Blaine. I think this city is going to change in character because of the word tourism. I've always maintained the best kept secret in the United States is Oregon. And the best kept secret in Oregon is Oregon City. And those falls are not going to go away. Mm-hmm. And because of the attraction of those falls and everything that goes with it, and Blue Heron, and who would have known that those people were going to go into receivership? Mm-hmm. This thing just fell into our lap, and here we are, and we've got to decide what we're going to do with it. And I think half of it has to do with traffic and parking. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's fair to ask Public Works or anybody to come up with a interim solution I think we all need information, and it's subject to public participation. This is number one, even without Blue Heron, it's still one of the number one issues in this community is off-street parking and parking in general, traffic generation. So I'm not looking towards an answer from John. I mean, this takes some thought, and I think it takes some thought and response from our community at large as to just what do we want to do with traffic and off-street parking, because we're talking parking structure, we're talking this, we're talking that, and we haven't really analyzed it.
Mhm.
And it's part of our master plan for the city.
Right.
It really is, and I think it's premature to ask any of our staff to come up with a solution when we're not in a position right now to look at the subject in a comprehensive manner.
Sure.
Because we're talking some big bucks here,
Right.
some really big dollars. It's quite a public investment.
Any other input, Betty?
Well,
John?
the parking
Parking
downtown.
is, yeah.
The parking downtown is a problem, but a lot of it's the county, the courthouse.
Yeah.
You know, they should be looking at a shuttle service too, because of the jury duty, the people who have to come in for tickets. You know, even if you go down there on, was it Tuesday night, when they have night court,
Oh, is that right?
it fills up down
I
there.
didn't know that.
And they park everywhere down there.
One of the, okay, so I want to be, I didn't think this committee was asking us necessarily for an answer, but they were asking us to facilitate a conversation.
Right.
The problem that I was having was, you know, given this, you know, I think where the city's been directed to go with the trolley and the trolley funding, and you know, I get this tourism piece, but we're not hearing that from the city commission as a whole. I'm guessing there's a couple members on there that might feel that way, but as a whole, they've consistently kind of voted for, you know, the trolleys to not necessarily be supported in our budget. So, and I think I should say consistent. We heard that last night. We heard it at their retreat as well. That was another place where they didn't support it. So they've kind of come full circle with that. But you know, they recognize that there's community value in that. I mean, we saw it here the last meeting, and so I just, you know, it's back to having a discussion and trying to figure out how best to facilitate that. Do we think that if it's about shuttle or if it's about parking? Because that parking question, I keep hearing parking is working really well since we've implemented the two-way traffic and parking plan, and so maybe there's some tweaks that need to happen to the paid parking, those kind of things. But again, that's something that the police department or code enforcement is proposing to bring to the city commission on the 1st. If there's specific questions that we can develop in this meeting, I think that would help formulate their presentation. And maybe, you know, otherwise I think what I don't want to have is another presentation that maybe falls short of what you guys are expecting, and then, you know, we don't, you know, it'll be weeks before we get them in front of us again. Maybe if we have specific questions that we want to write down, send, you know, ship to them and say, here's some things that, and somebody's going to be at that meeting from the TAC to kind of hear your response to that, and that might be helpful, at least with the parking issue. The shuttle issue is, you know, maybe there's more, you know, more to that one too. Although the conversations that I've had with the city managers, you know, he's feeling like, well, you know, how do we know if we even need shuttle service until more effort goes into that? And right now it doesn't feel like it's needed. To him, it doesn't feel like it's needed based on the feedback he's getting on the downtown parking.
When you say shuttle, are you referring to parking shuttle?
Right.
Okay.
Parking shuttle.
All right.
Yeah. Or any kind of shuttle. I mean, I think over time, whether it be higher use of Amtrak or higher use of some of the other tourist kind of facilities, you know, shuttle may make sense, but we're not there right now.
I agree. I think that'd be a giant leap of shuttle.
John?
Yes, in the latter part of this agenda, item 6G, we'll be talking a little bit about that downtown parking study. And that was the study that was done by Rick Williams Consulting. It had a date of April 1st, 2013 on it, but the actual study was done in 2009, so it's a little dated. And I don't know if other members had a chance to look at it, but one of the things they're recommending there, and I think I saw it one of the presentations here, was a change in the current required minimum for parking if somebody's building a new facility downtown. And they would be reducing the required minimum parking standards. And that study has a number of questions in it. It's a bit dated. So the role of that and the role of the trolleys and the role of a potential shuttle, it seems like the conversations always get commingled and nobody comes up with a clear picture of each one so that we can then see if there is some potential for joint use one way or another. And I'm thinking that what's going to happen here is we'll be unable to generate enough concrete information. We'll be sitting here a year from now and the trolleys will be going away on July 1st. So not that I'm married to the trolleys, I'm just trying to figure out a way to get this in a manageable discussion. And as we have this conversation, we've moved from trolleys to shuttle to other types of mass transit. And it seems like we never put our finger on exactly what the costs are, the pros and cons of each and how they fit together. So that, if you look at the last sentence in the minutes on that item on that agenda, it said John Anderson requested a matrix analysis so that we can make a decision regarding the trolley program, separating this other stuff out and just looking at that.
Right. So that's we can if we ask our police department to produce some of that information with regards to cost of the trolley program, right?
Yeah, we have that, right?
Their pushback is that that they've kind of crossed that line already. They've gotten over that hurdle in their minds, and because of that, that's why the trolleys aren't going to be funded in the next budget year.
Right.
So I think there's some reluctance to want to bring that back to the TAC, but we can ask them. I mean, if we're specific about wanting to look at trolley costs.
I think they, in their presentation, pretty well outlined that the trolley costs used the way they are right now doesn't work.
Right. Right. So that's kind of
what we could, for example, we could take Bob's suggestion and try fares for a year and see if that generates any real money. I mean, it might be a very small amount of money, or maybe it will generate enough money and create some new opening to pursue. I don't know, but the transit system I've seen don't generally do that.
Yeah, most bus systems are subsidized by 60-70%. So fares, I don't think, would cover the cost.
The amount of people that ride it versus $2, it's not going to go very far.
Well, and I think part of the confusion on this whole issue over the years has been that we committed to an asset, we purchased them, and now we want to keep them alive, and so let's find a square peg to put in a round hole, and to me, I think a study would be well and good, but it just seems to be pretty clear, and I think we had agreement on this at our last meeting that, do the trolleys work as a bus? Like the CAT down in Canby, no, it really, they don't. They're inadequate. Do they work as a parking shuttle? Well, possibly, but probably not. There are better solutions, more cost-effective solutions. Tourism, that's probably the best use, but we don't have the tourism here at this point. One thought I had, and if there's going to be a cost study, it would be interesting to know what it would, if it would be feasible from a cost standpoint to mothball them. Now I've heard that the storage where they're at that's a major part of the cost running, so I don't know how we would do that. But, if we could mothball those vehicles, for 5 or more years, I think they would come into use at some point and be a real strong component here for tourism.
I want to say, and I haven't looked at this number, I'm sure Martin hasn't because he hasn't had to deal with this, but I want to say we spend $1,600 a month to store them up at the Armory.
$1,500 a month?
$1,600 a
16,
month.
okay.
I heard it was $30,000 a year.
Yeah, so it's in that ballpark.
Isn't this issue before the budget committee now in terms of being?
Last night they approved a budget that only provided funding for the trolleys for this next season.
Yeah, so I think part of our discussion is kind of moot. I mean, the budget committee has made a decision that the recommendation from the city manager's office is to just keep them around for another year, and after that, not to budget for them. Am I?
I think the budget committee did, and as you know, that's partly citizens and city commission. The city commission also made that decision in their goal settings.
Yeah.
And while they didn't take action on it, and I think they punted a little bit in shipping it back to the TAC. I'm not quite sure they created, I think, a little more of a quandary than this group did in suggesting that we have some kind of a joint work session on trolleys.
Yeah.
When in reality there's not that budget support for that. So
I think
that's the quandary that we're in. We're kind of going around in circles on this.
I think the budget takes precedence.
What's the age of those trolleys?
They vary. We have one that's fairly new. We bought it probably 4 years ago. Had it built about 4 years ago. It's got value to it. I mean, that's the one thing. We've got 3 trolleys. One of them is often a reluctant backup trolley, right? And the other is run. So the other 2 run pretty well.
I like that, yes.
Refuses to start.
Well, I'd recommend that we just end the discussion on the trolley issue because they've funded it for this upcoming year, and it can't be funded for the next year. But I would resist the recommendation of the police department to liquidate the assets of the trolley and perhaps try to find a way to mothball them like Blaine said. And the mothballing issue would be the next step. Because I've beat it to death.
Well, the First City Central Marketplace and Bistro will be coming in. It's the renovation on the Amtrak train station is going to take a little bit longer than anticipated, so it may not come online until about 2014. But one of the thoughts that we had is that if we may be able to purchase one of those and actually use it, I would say party bus, but do some packages that rent it out to executives and put a you can have drinks and ride around the city and that kind of a thing. So those are popular. But who knows? There's some creative ideas. So we've got a year to think about it.
Yeah. Do you need a motion from us or just consensus?
No, I just would like to take it back to the city manager, and if there's specific questions that we want to give direction for the May 1st meeting on downtown parking. I know you asked some questions that are a little different, just to be clear. So the downtown parking study that you referred to, I think, is more along the lines of what they're going to be talking about.
Right.
I think the question about new development downtown or redevelopment downtown and what our parking standards are through our code. Mm-hmm. That's a different conversation. That's the conversation that Christina has been having we've been having it through our planning commission and we had it at planning commission first. Now we're in a joint planning and city commission meetings. That's talking about when something redevelops in the downtown district and the McLaughlin and the 7th Street district. So how many of you are kind of aware of that discussion? That's a little different discussion, and it's really talking about when there's redevelopment in a mapped area that really kind of encompasses a portion of McLaughlin neighborhood on 7th Street, and then pretty much all of our downtown area. When something new develops down there, the thinking is a lot of the development that's proposed down there can't meet the parking standards that we currently have. So Christina has put together a detailed chart about how those could be reduced, so that not on street, off-street parking for a developer would be allowed to be cut at 50% in the downtown area, and like 35% is what they were proposing for the 7th Street corridor. That conversation has not come before us at this committee, but it's being discussed in public hearing right now through the transportation system plan, because it's part of the code amendments that came along with the transportation system, or that got kind of added to the code changes that came about because of the transportation system plan. So they've been met with resistance. I would also say there's some uncertainty about whether or not that portion of the code amendments that's being discussed through our legislative process of approval is whether or not that's going to get pulled or not. But that's what you're talking about, John, and that's some of what you were asking about in your questions. And I'm not overly familiar with. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it today, but Kathy printed the parking study for us, and I haven't spent a lot of time looking at that myself. But
the parking study actually recommends reducing the parking requirements in the central business district. I don't know if it comes up with a specific number, but it fits hand in glove with what you say is being worked on by planning commission staff.
Right.
And so for those who feel that there is insufficient parking downtown, or I said use the word feel,
right.
And for those who feel that there may be needs for shuttle or something, it seems like the recommendation to reduce required off-street parking with new development would compound their feeling of lack of parking.
Mm-hmm.
And that particular study was done in 2009, so one of the questions I had was, have circumstances changed since they did that study? And they may have, since it was 2009. You talked to the Downtown Association, and they've brought in a lot of new to retail business. I don't know on the methodology that they used, if the retail business, whether it was being occupied or vacant, did they count the square footage in terms of using the formula for the amount of planning and parking. So at any rate, kind of jumping ahead to the next topic, but I guess it fits this earlier conversation if you felt we needed some kind of shuttle for off-site parking, whether it was for the county or anybody else.
Well, should we ask that specific question of the police department to address whether or not what their opinion is on shuttle service to and from either the city lot or the Amtrak, or I mean, is that a specific question would like them to address in the May meeting? Is that, or is it? I mean, I think
that might be useful. That might be useful, and also the one that they came up with here, is it viable to mothball the trolleys?
John, excuse me for interrupting, but John, should we really be realistically asking our police department to gather that kind of information? Don't they have a few other things that they could be doing?
Maybe.
Really. Well, what I'm concerned about is overload in some of our understaffed departments.
Yeah, that's a fair question. But
the city manager raised that point at the budget committee meeting the other night about our tax rate being so low because we are understaffed in this community, and we are. I'm amazed at some of these efforts that these departments make for our commissions and for our committees. My goodness gracious.
Well, and I think part of it goes back to what John made about separating the issue. You know, if we're going to go to the police department and say, well, given the parking situation downtown, are we going to, cross this thing again and say, well, could we consider the trolleys, as a shuttle, parking shuttle? But in my mind, the issue of the trolley and parking as a parking shuttle it should be off the table.
Okay.
And also as intercity bus service off the table. The only thing that it should be considered for is tourism, and I just don't think that we have the demand at this point to justify continuing to run those. If they budget for another year, that's fine. I'd love to see them stay, but if there's not a use for it, let's be smart about that. But anyway, that's my thought on that, and so I don't know why we would ask the police about shuttle service. I do think the mothball idea should be at least talked about, and before just selling them. But
So they're funded for another year, and the mothballing issue could be conceivably discussed at the end of that year to be included into the budget, maybe, because this is a 2-year budget.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the timing of when that should be discussed is kind of open-ended, but I think we can ask again, because it is the trolley program is in the police department right now, and I think we just need to let them know that at some point in time they need to provide the answer about whether or not it's worthy of mothballing those so that they could be used for some future tourism use.
I agree with
Yep.
Blaine. I just don't think the city can right now at this point afford them. You're not getting the bang for your buck.
And there may be some creative entrepreneurial kinds of things that could happen in the next year that could be considered. And so, if they sell the asset, it may be sold locally. So, at least one of them. So,
Privatize them.
Okay, I think that's a great discussion. I appreciate that. Helps.
we can go on to the next item, but it seems a little bit disconnected. It almost seems like we should leapfrog to item 6G, and since we're kind of in that mode. Is there agreement on that? Then we can come back to item 6E, 6F rather.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So parking study recommendations. Get us started on that, John, and what your thinking is.
Which John?
John,
Me? Okay.
our grand leader.
Well, again, I think if we're talking about the code for parking, I think that's something we could easily have Christina bring to the table. It may still be in play with the city commission in terms of approval for this idea of changing parking requirements for downtown. I do think it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of neighborhoods in the Portland metro area. I was in Multnomah, in the little part of Multnomah, and it's kind of similar to Oregon City. It's got some age to it. It's not the first city, don't get me wrong here, but it's kind of unique in the little shops that it has down there. Storefront shops right along there's narrow sidewalks and narrow one-way traffic through there. And was in there recently, and just, there's very little on-street parking in my, there's a brew pub in there now that pizza and brew. They occupied, I think, an old church or something, but if they'd have had to meet their parking standards, they probably would have made them. And I wonder how that community got around that. The courthouse here in town, that's a good example of zero parking requirements, right? There's very little on or off-street parking for the courthouse, and that's true for a lot of the buildings downtown.
They're expanding too, aren't they?
They're actually adding they're actually a facility, not necessarily for more capacity to have more court hearings, but to help house convicts or criminals that are going to court.
have a Sally Port.
To bring them in and out of that building.
Okay, all right.
But, with that is going to come some parking loss in the parking lot that they cohabitate with
McMinimums? Yeah.
So anyway, it seems to me like I get the arguments that we've been hearing about the changing the parking standard in the downtown area means that more people are going to want to park in the neighborhoods, which puts, public parking in front of people's homes that might be in the McLaughlin neighborhood. And so there was some resistance there, and I get that. But at the same time, it seems like even if I want to go downtown and I have to make a couple loops, you tend to do that. People get used to do that in shopping centers and parking lots. You kind of wait, and as people come and go, that's kind of how it works. And it happened for me when I was in Multnomah. I was like, I had to go around and make a couple of U-turns, and finally found something, and it opened up, and I wasn't that deep into the neighborhood. And if you think about our topography, our elevation changes, I kind of wonder if you're wanting to get downtown and frequent a business downtown, are you really going to, how many people are going to take the climb up into the neighborhood? I see it down here at the pub more often than anything. They're having a Scottish event, and they've got tents and everything else out. They park all the way up South End Hill, but that's kind of unusual and unique, and I kind of wonder how much of that's really going to happen.
Those Irish drinkers.
Yes,
They park anywhere.
Scottish.
Oh, is it Scotty?
Yeah.
Oh.
So
all the same.
I'm appreciating the debate. I never had to consider this issue, and Christina's brought a lot of good arguments for it, and I hear from the Planning Commission and the City Commission some real concerns about that. But I just look at other communities. If you're trying to balance redevelopment with parking, it makes sense to kind of reduce those parking standards.
I think that's right where Oregon City is right now. I mean, we're kind of in those awkward teenage years, and so I think you look at 23rd or Multnomah Village. I mean, these are mature. I mean, they've been around. They've got just incredibly funky, unique. So people are drawn to those areas, and they have people living all through those neighborhoods, 23rd and Multnomah and others. We don't really have people living downtown. It hasn't gotten to that point where it's a really super interesting, funky place to go, and it doesn't have that attraction. So I totally agree with what the code by having the ratios. I think that's going to have a positive effect in attracting new businesses, new development in downtown. But you're going to have that adjustment where people are having people park in front of their homes all the time. And I know people in 23rd, gosh, we go down there a few times a year, and we're always parking in front of someone's house. And so I guess you just kind of get used to it, I guess. I don't know how to get around that. But, just to say that I think Oregon City is going through a growing phase, and we're just going to have to work through it. But I do support the reduction of did you want to say?
The other thing, John, Kathy handed me your email. I'm not sure about the date of 2013. I'm wondering if that's the date it was printed. Maybe we just
it says up here right at the top, April 1, 2013, and to the Oregon City Planning Commission. And then when you read the second paragraph, it says they conducted the parking study in Oregon City in 2009.
Well,
so that must be associated with the code changes, not with the parking
That's
study.
right. Yeah,
I'm guessing.
Okay.
That's the consultant's recommendation.
Right.
Based on, 2000.
That must be what that is, because that is more recent work.
I haven't seen that. We haven't seen it.
I don't know how, I can't tell you how I got it.
It's on
Maybe
our
it's-
page.
I don't-
Blaine
yeah.
sent it.
Nice.
Yeah, Blaine sent it, okay.
Yeah.
My fault.
One of the things that's interesting, anecdotes, so my wife and I were having a conversation about the consultant's recommendation, again, in this, and she talked about when she volunteers, there's 3 or 4 other volunteers working in the same place, at the bookstore here, the used bookstore, Friends of the Library. Several people just mentioned they don't go downtown because they don't like to mess with the parking meters. And so there may be, it seems to me that if you look at the consultant study saying that they're only being utilized to about 80%, the parking stalls, then you have people's anecdotal experience saying well, it's too much of a hassle, I'm not going to park there. How can you get some hard information that would sort that out? I don't know how much of a rate increase went into effect when they brought the new meters in, but if there was some way to determine if there's more revenue coming in, if you were holding constant for the rate increase, I guess that would indicate that more people are parking down there, right? Maybe, maybe not, but there's some way to measure that to see if they have been a plus or a minus.
Well, there was considerable discussion at the Government and Economic Affairs Committee, Oregon City Chamber, and that topic came up, and people started sharing stories, and it was pretty amazing. One person had come to visit Oregon City Main Street and walked away, I believe it was with a $75 ticket. And they just didn't see the, and those kinds of things. And their comment was, hey, we're never coming back to Oregon City again.
Yeah.
So how deep that goes, I don't know. But I'm sure it's in every urban area. I'm sure it's the same problem.
But John, again, this kind of gets back to our police department's coming to provide a report on downtown parking on May 1st. Is there a question in what you just went through that you want to ask?
So when they present that report, would they have financial information that shows that revenues have increased, aside from whether or not there was a rate increase, which may show that there's actually been increased use of the parking, on-street parking down there, which then I would think would be a strong argument for not having to go out and create more parking, whether it's for a shuttle or having high standards for new development. So you're trying to figure out a way to, I guess, define those anecdotal stories and sort them out and say, well, there's a lot of open space down here in terms of parking available, and parking use is up. Therefore, people are going to have their own personal experience, but it's a small minority. Therefore,
and a lot of that stuff is bleed over from when we were closed, when we had downtown kind of cordoned off, and it was confused. It's no different than we heard a fair amount of people with the jug handle that didn't really like the way that was going, but over time, those things seem to work themselves out. And I just kind of, is it reasonable? Does the panel feel like it's reasonable if you want to go get dinner downtown? Do you get concerned about downtown parking?
Well,
I
don't.
I don't.
But my wife says you don't count in this. I mean, different people
how
have
about
different attitudes.
Does Steve count? Maybe.
We go down after it's free parking.
Yeah, I don't know. I think some of that stuff is just carryover, and.
Well, I get concerned about that 85 percentile that they talk about because what happens now when people get more used to coming downtown because the bridge is open again, they've got the two-way street, Main Street now. There may still be some I'm sure there is some leftover concerns about downtown parking from years past. So as people get over that barrier, that thinking, that 85 percentile will go away, and if we don't do proper planning now, we'll be back in that bad situation again.
The 85th percentile of...
Well, the police department in a report a few months ago said I think that what they were talking about was that downtown parking is at 85% utilized.
Okay.
So that leaves 15% that's
under.
But I think that the 15% is on the outlying, from the south end of Main Street and then to the north end of Main Street. It's pretty easy parking. But once you get to the core, and of course we all know the horror stories of around the courthouse.
Yeah.
It gets more critical.
Well, I have two questions that I would like asked. One is, and I know there have been various meetings but has a survey been done among the downtown merchants? There have been changes, the two-way directional changes and other things. That maybe the parking for merchants isn't as critical. I wrote in my note to John, I said I don't have a dog in the race. We have parking spots at the store. So, but I for one would not have considered opening a retail establishment without our own off-street parking. So I would like to know if the merchants have been surveyed and what the climate is there. And the other question I have is whether or not, when I mention, and I've heard others mention, a centralized multi-level mixed-use parking garage, that conversation gets typically gets shut down pretty quickly. And the comment is always, well, cost prohibitive, and I get that, but at some point it becomes cost prohibitive not to do so. The opportunity cost. So I think once you say we're going to the moon, then everybody marshals their ideas and resources to get it done. And I would like to know if the planners have seriously said a multi-level mixed-use parking garage centrally located in downtown Oregon City would solve a lot of our problems. What would it take to do that? And is there an action plan or timeline, or what factors need to be in place to get that done? And if there may be a good reason, I don't know. There may be a real good reason why that kind of a facility would not be the best thing for downtown Oregon City. But in my mind, that would solve a lot of problems. And the number one being for shoppers, predictability is the key. Convenience and predictability. I've said it before, but we can. People don't want to come downtown, and at some point they may be willing to when Oregon City has just grown up like some of these other areas. But right now, I think the convenience would help draw shoppers downtown. But
Blaine, they have discussed this a couple of years ago, and they talked about the property next to Kentucky Fried Chicken, that area. But as you said, it always kind of gets tabled because of the cost.
Right.
Let me make an administrative observation. I really think that downtown parking is related closely to land use planning. Land use planning is a responsibility of the Planning Commission. They have a regulation, state regulations, which pretty much point them in that direction. And I think the downtown parking issue is a Planning Commission issue for study and resolve, because they recommend to the City Commission, who then will change an ordinance. We can't change ordinances. We don't have the authority, traditionally or administratively, to recommend to the City Commission to affect downtown parking, and thereby bypassing the authority of the Planning Commission. And I think we're going to cross swords, cross purposes, if this committee here takes on the responsibility to get involved, because I think then you're going to have the Planning Commission involved, this committee involved, and then you're going to have the complications of administratively getting it done. So I would suggest for the consideration of this committee that we just let the Planning Commission do its job, because that is their responsibility to study this, make a recommendation to the City Commission for the changing of ordinances for land use, and hopefully we can get the answer. We're not going to get the answer in this committee. We're not going to make any effective changes, because if we do, and the Planning Commission gets their nose bent out of joint, and they will, because that's their responsibility, then we haven't really gained anything. And I don't know, I'd like to hear some comments from my colleagues about that, how they think.
Well, I'm not thinking, and never was thinking, that we would be making a recommendation that would go over the head of the planning commission. I mean, anything that had to do with land use, ours would strictly be advisory recommendation to them if that's the process, and then on to city commission. So I don't think we'd be stepping out of our role. We're just advisory. We're advisory to the commission. We can be advisory to staff. We can be advisory to other standing committees. That's all we'd be doing. They could do with it as they wish, I guess, but we may be looking at it from a slightly different angle than they are. So, I mean, I'm trying to figure out where we go from here. You were asking for some questions for the May 1st meeting.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the one or two we've listed so far?
Well, I didn't write it down verbatim, and I figured I'd wordsmith it, but first question was about a survey and whether or not downtown has been surveyed. The downtown businesses have been provided any survey about parking, and if so, what does the results of that look like?
There may be no problem down there now with the changes that have happened, so it'd be good to know that.
And then the other one was have our planners determined if a parking structure is going to be the best solution for downtown, and if so, what's the schedule and funding thoughts on that? Right. Those are a couple that I had. I've got another one that came out earlier that I started to write down, and then I put a big question mark. I wonder if Kathy got it. I was hoping Kathy or Martin.
John, could I tack on to the...
Oh, on the parking fares and counts for...
Yeah, no, they don't have to go out and create new numbers. They just have to report the revenue stream for each month since they've introduced the new meters, compare that to the revenue streams previous to that, make one adjustment for rate increases. And maybe that'll make it impossible to do an apples and apples comparison, but that I would think would give us some information about the use of downtown on-street parking.
I think so. I appreciate what Bob said. I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
You're on the planning commission now. That might be a message that we just continue to kind of carry through with them and try to. I think, like I said, this code amendment is got this right at the forefront right now. So they're thinking about parking. I know they are.
That's one of my points. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of how much it's going to cost. Because the planning commission might tell you to do or ask you to do one thing, and this committee might ask you to do another. It gets to be cross purposes. Administratively, at the management point of view, is, my God, where do we go from here?
Sure.
That type of thing.
But you have to listen to all the stakeholders, right? I mean, you have to listen to the business merchants and the transportation advisory committee.
But the question is, where does that information flow from? Does it come to this committee, and then it's translated to the planning commission? And there's always information loss when you transmit information, always, because you're dealing with people. I think I heard what he said, and yada yada yada. And then there's staff time. And I just would like to see the issue reduced to its simplest form and brought to the logical committee that's been charged with that responsibility, you see. And I raise this question because traffic and land use and off-street parking go hand in hand with land use planning, which is codified. Is it codified or codified? I don't know. Always get that mixed up.
Depends on whether you're from Beaver Creek or Beaver Creek.
And I understand this committee's concern, and God bless you for it. But I just don't want to see things get diluted because of too much information.
Well, I think it states in our mission of the Transportation Advisory Committee that we are to advise the City Commission and the Planning Commission, and so that's, I think, our purpose is to advise them, not to make changes or code changes or anything official like that. We just advise the other entities.
Yeah. So a tack on to the second question, John, would be, to Robert's point, the planners come at these things from a particular point of view, maybe more comprehensive than our committee's view or tourism or downtown merchants. But I would like to know on the issue of parking garage, parking facility, if that is not a viable option, why? Other than just saying it's cost prohibitive. I'm assuming there are really good reasons why that might not fit with the downtown area or the timing's not right. I would just like to know the rationale, and I haven't heard it yet, but that could be that I only hear every third or fourth word that people say.
Okay.
Another thing about parking, in residential areas, I want to say in Northwest, some areas have permits that you park at certain hours. You're allowed because you live in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that true? And I don't know if that's something, that could be happening, in the residential area around McLaughlin neighborhood. Like no parking unless you have a permit for this area, like after 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think the problem has to develop first, and then those solutions make sense.
Exactly.
Right now, it's just kind of this idea of making some code changes, and then there's assumption that it's going to create this, wave of frustration in the neighborhoods.
We just don't know.
We just don't know that yet.
No.
But when you do, there are models that the city could follow for solutions for that. I think that's one of them. So.
Well, we don't want to get in the way. We want to be a help. So, however that happens, hopefully these questions will at least give them some of our perspective and ideas.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think there are some values in that 2009 study that might be revisited. I don't know if anybody has thought about doing that, but there's references to like a desired outcomes, develop a better plan for juror parking, or
and the one thing I haven't said, but the city manager's right. I mean, he continues to work on this issue. Mm-hmm. He's working on it with the new county commissioners. So it's not idle. It's just, it's kind of one of those things until you have something that you can stamp and say approved, it's probably not worth a lot of time to provide a lot of updates.
It's just ongoing.
But he's,
thing, yeah.
I mean, I heard about it today that he had recent meetings with the county commissioners, at least a couple of them. And I mean, that was one of the topics, was downtown parking, and he feels strongly, I would say really strongly, that that's the biggest problem we have with downtown parking isn't a city problem. It's a problem. And so we had a staff meeting talking about one of our department heads who had to go through jury duty, and just kind of listening even to the clerks that are giving instructions to the jurors or potential jurors. How and they place all the blame on the city. The city's the bad guy, and so anybody that comes to visit to do jury duty in Oregon City kind of gets this impression of Oregon City through court clerks, and how big a problem that is too. So it's it's not a dead issue.
Okay.
That parking structure is not a dead issue.
Good. Well, has this been helpful then, John?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Good. Any other comments before we move backwards to item 6F? Downtown Transit Center crosswalk. That's an update item.
Sorry about that. Just give me a moment here. Just catching up on my notes. At the last meeting, we talked to you guys about some alternatives that we were taking a look at for the crosswalks over there by the transit center in the downtown corridor. A few things that we've considered is there are some long-term plans for the redevelopment of that area where we're going to be looking at expending some significant funds. We were trying to do it this year, hoping to get a grant, which didn't come to fruition, but it doesn't mean we're not going to keep trying. And then trying to take a look at the long-term plans for that entire area and what are the appropriate measures. So the proposal that we were looking at was possibly moving one of the locations of the crosswalks to give a better sight line distance. That doesn't look like it's going to be a very viable option. What we're thinking in terms of right now is trying to take a look at some increased legends that we could deploy out along the actual street, put out there by the keys, the crosswalk keys, for the pedestrians, just kind of advising them, proceed with caution and something along those lines. We're taking a look at a couple options right now online, that some new keys that we could put out there that might get our message across. With the long-term plan being that when the grant funding comes in and all the ducks are in a row, we have the funds, trying to come up with a much more viable option for facilitating pedestrians getting across that corridor.
All right.
Is that everything we wanted to touch on?
Well, signage improvements too. We thought, advanced crosswalk signage there would be something that we could do that would be in front of the buses, so that if a bus was parked there, that the sign wouldn't be behind the buses. Get it out there closer to where the vacant lot is by Kentucky Fried Chicken, and just do a better job of denoting the crosswalk where it's at.
Okay, any comments from? All right, thank you. Now moving on to item 6H, McLaughlin Boulevard Enhancement Project Open House. This is an informational item.
Yeah, the 30th, I think.
It's in the packet.
It's in the packet.
Sorry that, I think I gave duplicate pages.
Yes.
On the backside.
Excellent.
Yeah, April 30.
April 30th. All right.
Yeah.
What's that?
What time is that?
5:30
5:30 to 7.
April 30? I can't read it.
April 30th,
Okay.
5:30.
All right. And that's at the Pioneer Center?
It'll be
Commission
here
chamber.
at the Commission
Oh, chamber,
Chamber,
okay.
5:30
Yep.
to 7.
Got it. All right, very good. Future agenda items. Looks like we have a bylaw discussion, and Steve will be leading that one. So, just for our recollection, what were those discussions? What was the bylaw issue? Was that on membership to the committee? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one is the Oregon Rail. I've gone to a meeting. You'll probably, by
I'll be
our
there.
next meeting, have gone to a meeting. So if we could put that on the agenda, an update.
Oregon Passenger Rail.
So that'll just, I think, let's see, that would just be a discussion item, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, are there any other items that need to be discussed for the good of the order?
Well, I had a question, being gone for so long. What was ever happening with where Partlow came into South End Road and Lafayette was? Intersection? I know that there was a study that was,
Yeah, that was a report
Right.
that was made there, that's available online and probably in one of your old packets.
okay.
So we did an engineering study, didn't recommend a crosswalk at that location because of the speed along South End Road
Okay.
and the conflicts along there without some kind of a rapid flashing pedestrian activated beacon. So that was,
Okay, because I know I usually go the back way out of there, but today I traveled that road, and I'm thinking in order to see north and south, you need to be on the crosswalk on Partlow.
yeah, that's true.
I mean, the sight distance is,
Yep. Yeah, I think when they designed that, the radiuses were a little larger than they needed to be. But
Okay.
yeah, it requires you to, you're supposed to stop at this, before the crosswalk and then inch out and cross over that crosswalk to really kind of see oncoming traffic, so. I don't know that the study touched much on that. The study was more about,
crosswalk
Oh,
by the
crosswalk.
firehouse?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Just a quick question. What's the status of the TSP? It's going through the process to be approved?
Yes, the transportation system plan has been through, I think, 3 planning commission meetings, 1 work session with the joint planning and city commission. I think I didn't bring my schedule. I think it goes back to the planning commission one more time and then through city commission meetings. So
Have those been pretty much just an internal conversation between members of those two bodies, or has there been a lot of citizen input, or what's the nature of what's been happening?
there has been a fair amount of citizen input. Definitely this parking discussion. Holly Lane, which is outside the city, is another point of discussion.
Yeah.
We've got, actually, glad you brought that up. Kind of problematic discussion about mobility standards and what's the level of congestion. If you remember the volume over capacity, or V over C figure, or V over C standard that ODOT has adopted, and we talked about adopting in our transportation system plan as well. For several ODOT facilities, that standard is probably exceeded even at today's standard, let alone in 2035. So that's kind of that's true for the region as well. It's not just Oregon City that has those kind of congestion problems. The region has them, but it's put us in a difficult spot to figure out what our code amendments should be for those facilities that we already know aren't going to meet the standard. Should we have a different standard that allows for more congestion? And so there's been a fair amount of discussion about that. I don't know that the community has been chiming in real heavily on that because it's a pretty confusing issue and it's fairly new. So we've been talking about it with we've had John Repplinger, who's one of our transportation consultants, and also Carl Springer from DKS, who's been talking about that. And it has some real implications for the state, and for the city, and for the region. And unfortunately, the other little problem we have with that is we've got some existing development that's being proposed out along Beaver Creek Road, and that's likely to come up against this question about where the standards should be. If they came in today, they wouldn't meet our standard, and so they'd have to be, we'd have to recommend to the Planning Commission to deny that application. And some might think that's a good thing. I don't know. Others might not. But this standard issue has to be dealt with. Mobility standard.
Is that something that could be sent out to that we could get a little more educated on that issue, the VORC and those standards, or is that something that someone can come and give a talk?
I'm trying to think if there's anything that describes that very well in writing.
Yeah.
It's a very confusing topic, and I don't think we've actually developed like our slide presentations, there's bulleted points for that, but they're not going to give you much information.
Right. Okay.
During the planning of the TSP, when that came up, I was totally confused.
Yeah, I think there's the meetings are available for viewing. We could have someone come to this meeting if that's
Only if
the
it'd be
request.
helpful. I mean, I don't know what you.
It may, we're trying to move down a pretty fast track with approval. We'd like to get that transportation system plan approved by the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
But this is April, so we could have a May meeting where they could share that with you. I'm not necessarily sure it's going to, I don't know, where it will be in the decision-making process, but at least you'll understand that issue a little bit more.
Okay.
It just boils down to the fact that we can't afford it.
Yep.
We just don't have the, and
Don't have the money.
it's driven by growth.
By growth, right?
It's
yeah,
driven by
right,
growth, and
right.
that is the paradox of the whole
Right.
situation. And a lot of the growth area is outside the city, which is subject to the voter approval,
Right.
which several times has been denied.
Right. Right.
So that takes the opportunity for growth away, and when growth comes, they can't is proposed, they can't meet the standard because the standard is different than. Well, I don't know. I'm as confused as anybody else on that equation, but it's really a catch-22 situation.
Yeah.
Really.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So, for example, if Walmart comes in on the upper part here, Malala, thank you, I got a mental blank. How far downstream do you measure their impact? So they might be required to do some traffic enhancements fairly close to their facility. But do they have any obligation for, the Beaver Creek 213 intersection, which may get more traffic because they're up here now?
Right. They actually do have to look at that intersection in particular, and others further away, even Malala and 213 as well. So, when they did the county master plan for red soils, they looked at that's part of the reason, and part of their SDCs actually went to fund the jug handle project. So they look pretty far out on those bigger facilities.
That's good for people to understand. I think most of the time you just think the impact is in the immediate area where the facility is going.
Yeah, no, it goes much further than that. And that's actually the one development that I was kind of talking about. They're in talking to us about a pre-application meeting, and their traffic engineers have kind of run some numbers, and they're showing that they see that they don't meet that standard. And so there's a lot of questions that developed because of that particular proposal.
Well, and if you can't contribute a SDC fee towards the eventual solution of the problem, then you're really in a mess.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to what you were saying.
And the problem is, if this city doesn't grow to protect its tax base, eventually you
Right.
can't pay your bills.
Right. Well, there are other issues too. We had a meeting, the Oregon City Business Alliance had one of our Metro counselors come out, and it was really interesting to hear her share that first, Oregon City is of the top 20 cities in Oregon. Oregon City is the second fastest growing, just barely behind Beaverton, and most people don't realize that. But the other thing, because of we've developed a reputation here in Oregon City, most of you probably know that, but it actually has a tangible impact because of the resistance to development and to annexation. Top people in the state of Oregon have said they will not allocate funds to Oregon City because they just can't seem to get projects done. And so I thought that was an interesting comment. And then the other thing is that Metro, because of our unwillingness to annex within the UGB, which that's what the UGB was there, that annexation should happen. It's a natural place for it to happen. But because of the resistance and the voter approval, Metro is now being forced to actually encroach on farmland and forest land to add to the UGB to simulate growth in other areas of the metro area. So it's kind of like, that's interesting. So, we need to realize that growth is inevitable, and let's do it reasonably so that,
That's why this Blue Heron project is so critical to this community. It will change the face of this community for the next 50 years if it's done, like you say, smart and reasonable. And everybody's got to pull together.
Right.
Because just one little glitch and the investors pull back.
Right. Yep. Well, good discussion tonight. And any other comments? Betty, welcome back. Good to have you. And
It's nice to be back.
yeah, good work, everyone.
I just have one question, John.
Let's see if we can get Ken.
John?
John, I have a question about this, but we can talk about it after the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.